what we talk when we... In studio today, as usual, I'm having with me Sister Tagali, her name, I take caution to pronounce it because she has been complaining that I was calling her Tagali, but it's Takali, that's the right name. And also Ndugu Rugarama, they're all here today for the Pan-African Friday. Apparently, I think we'll not be going full course because along the way we'll be interrupted by the graduation coming to you from the Uganda Communication College. I think that will be from Nakawa, and when it does come we'll let you know. But for now we are continuing with the Pan-African Friday. Apparently we are looking at the continuous conflicts on the continent of Africa and the resolutions that have been put in place for some of these conflicts, and we are trying to evaluate to see if these resolutions that have been forward for the conflicts that we are having on this continent are working or are not working. And if they are not working, then what will be the remedy? And if they are working, then what are the lessons that as Africans will have learned? We'll start with the Ndugu Rugarama to greet the viewers who are following us now.
Good morning, comrades. Good morning to you, my colleagues here in the studio. And I'm particularly impressed that we are looking at this topic because, in my opinion, this is very timely. Since Uganda and the rest of the East African members recently, or for that matter, the East African community, made a decision, heads of states made a decision to deploy their respective armies in Democratic Republic of Congo to stabilize that country that has been characterized since colonial times by deep instability, which has also had spillovers to the rest of the East African community members, stored businesses, and created DRC as a hub of international vulturing. Okay. So I'm glad that has happened, and probably my week has also been spiced up by the World Cup. It is what we are talking about now. Those who are into the world of football, we've seen some opening shocks and pleasant moments from teams like Saudi Arabia. And I can assure you, we are in for more surprises because the story that there are no underdogs in World Cup is steadily but surely unfolding.
Tagali.
Well,
I don't know if you're also a football fan.
No, I was saying I'm glad to say that I'm 100% free of football mania.
I like that.
I don't follow, not because it's an evil thing.
You are calling it evil?
No, I'm saying I don't follow because it's not evil. Okay. That's not the reason I don't follow. It just doesn't interest me, I guess. But and also I think I was entrenched in this position by the unconvincing African performances so far.
So disappointing.
I don't know if you think they're convincing, but I go by the goal line. I don't know about what else happened. But that's where we are, and I'm looking forward to the end of the season, actually.
Sure. The earlier it ends, the better.
The better, yes.
Okay. So we'll be going straight, because we don't have much of the time today, looking at the conflicts on the continent and see how much of the interventions that Africans ourselves have tried to put in place, but also the other interventions that have come from elsewhere. We have seen the MONUSCO in DRC, and for quite some time, since I think 2000, when that force was formed, or transformed, because they have been there anyway. We have seen what is happening. We also have seen the intervention of Russia in some of the West African countries, of course this is also a new development because Russia doesn't have a lot of history in deploying forces, especially on the African continent. We've also seen France in Mali and some of those colonies around that area. But we've also seen the continuing conflicts in Sudan, Ethiopia, Somalia. So is it the problem of African ourselves that we can not handle our issues, or like Rugarama would want to suggest because of the Western influences? Where is the problem when we look at all these conflicts, if we segregate one by one? Is it the failure of the administration, the capacity to lead of the Africans, or it is the interference, the foreign interferences that have brought us to this level where we are? Where is the problem, Rugarama?
You see, one thing is very clear, that even before you treat a patient medically, there is a great need to look at the history of that particular patient. So permit me here to historicize the problem of Africa that result into these conflicts that we talk about. The pre-colonial Africa was not necessarily free of conflicts. They were chiefdom conflicts, they were kingdom conflicts, and indeed they were family conflicts. To the extent that some kingdoms, before the advent of the colonial rule, were capturing other kingdoms and taking them over.
Yeah, which was very normal.
Now, that was conflict. But at the same time, there were resolution mechanisms in place on the African continent. Somebody would either overwhelm you, or you would reach a truth and get to terms. With the coming in of the white man, the introduction of the colonial rule, that was another conflict. Because the white man didn't come to Africa and was given a red carpet. There were exceptionally few cases where he was given a red carpet. In majority of the cases, it was by use of the gun and also form of corruption, which was buying off chiefs and some of the elders. To that extent, those who resisted also expressed and created a form of conflict.
Yeah, but I think on on that still, you can realize that maybe it's the same conflict that has been carried forward up to date. Because if you are talking about the bribery, maybe then it was not called corruption, but also talking about the weakness, because you had even the original settlements, the original life in the African society was also based on the strength of the chiefdom, of the kingdom, or that family that you could survive. Because at the end of it, the benchmark, the basis situation is that you needed to have resources. And if these resources were, sometimes it was as a result of resources, sometimes as the result for expansion. But even in expansion, definitely you are looking for resources. So are we saying that this same format has been carried on, copied and pasted in the now, even in the under the colonialism?
I agree, and that is why I requested that I historize, come from the grassroots. What you have just mentioned is certainly part of the problem. But generally speaking, what is the problem that, or what are those areas where conflict has resulted what causes it. What is the problem of Africa, in other words? I would want to again borrow from the presentation of the President of the Republic of Uganda in South Africa 2015-2016 about the 11 bottlenecks of Africa, which are a sure source of conflicts on the African continent. I will just pick a few. One is ideological disorientation. Two is the issue of weak states. Three is the issue of weak public service. Four is the issue of the colonial or neo-colonial project. And that is where you are talking about the white man's agenda still on the African continent. Five is the issue of, that breeds conflicts, that is, the issue of less intra-trade amongst the African states, the issue of poorly developed infrastructure, whereby we cannot be able to communicate, be able to trade, move freely. We have a problem of less educated or uplifted human resource. And when you combine all that and more, you get a situation whereby the imperialistic agenda, for instance, which is alive and well, which resulted from the colonial legacy that was left here by the colonial man. Certainly, they left us with an army because the structure of the colonial master, at the time majority of the African countries were getting independence, was never dismantled. The structure of the police, the structure of the army, and the fact that majority of the African states have not come to grips with the fact that they need to reorganize their armies and make them stronger organically, as they have become victims of the white man's agenda, whereby they perpetuate their so-called training, armament, and funding, because the modern weapons that the African armies use against themselves is not the creation of the African armies themselves. Meaning, therefore, that we experience conflict on the African continent mainly because of the colonial structure that was left in place and the thinking, ideological bankruptcy that has been perpetuated again by the imperialistic agenda that we can fight, and we have been fighting, simply because we don't share a religion, and this religion is not ours. So and so is a Catholic, you are an Anglican, somebody is a Muslim, and the argument will be, we have seen these wars, that God has deployed me to fight somebody who is not of my religion. These are the kind of wars, these are the kind of conflicts that we have on the African continent.
Yeah, but then the problem, I think, when you look at some of these conflicts, like you are putting, that the colonial master, the West, all these names that we call them, are still part of our problem. But are they not building on the already existing infrastructure problem?
Yes, I can conclude with
because,
that.
why I'm saying so is that when you look at, of course, talking of the army is partly a problem is because we get the training of some of the armies of Africa are trained, inclined to the colonial master, for reasons that most of the arms you are using and the disciplines you adhere to are from your master. And we have carried on that, fortunately or unfortunately. But at the same time, what will be the alternatives if Africans said, now let's go our way, which we can do, and some countries have been able to do that. Can we stand on our own and we say, no, I think enough is enough here, let's do this? Of course, you saw what happened in Mali when the new regimes were now saying, no, I think with France, we have to get links, cut links. And the rest of that area, and you have seen the coups coming one after the other. I think people are shopping for who can be their puppet. So I think, as you conclude on that point, is it the problem not sprouting from the which was already existing before even the colonials arrived on the continent?
Like I said from my opening remarks, the truth of the matter is that conflict is within the nature of man.
Yes.
You don't even have to be an African to, there is also what we call self-conflict, that within yourself you are conflicting. You are conflicting. Maybe your heart is not at the same with your body. But taking this debate a little bit higher, when you look at the African Union, for instance, you are going to realize that we have got a full directorate, if you like, peace and security. And they have got mechanisms in place. They had, for instance, projected not long ago that at a certain point there was going to be what we call silencing of the guns. Now, the silencing of the guns, the time it had been given, actually guns have increased. We have had a series of military coups on the African continent. The entire West African region is ripped apart with military coups. We have had, and this was also mentioned because senior patriot and comrade Professor Mumba, who were presenting a paper, mentioned, he said, if, for instance, our forefathers, the framers of the African Organization of African Union were to come down here, and they come to terms with the grips, they come to grips with the fact that the entire Africa is as it is now, what would they say? Cameroon, you look at southern Cameroon, it is different from northern Cameroon.
Yes.
The administration in northern Cameroon, which is predominantly French, looks at Ambazodia as a state that is, for instance, an enemy state. You look at South Sudan, the Nua fighting with the Dinka, and if you ask them what the problem is, everybody wants to be the head of state. But these are the same people. You go to Ethiopia, you look at our brothers who think all of a sudden they want to be remain in power against all the other. So the entire Africa, in summary, therefore, majority of it, Central African Republic, Uganda in some parts, and DRC, which permanently is a beehive of conflicts, is ripped apart by military conflicts and other related, because not every conflict, by the way, is military in nature.
Yeah, so Richard, do you think, what's your thinking? Because it is true that the life of administration, of even business, even in fact even in marriage, some parts of Africa, I'm told people have to wrestle first before then you go to marry. Now this conflict is part of human existence. Now when you look at Africa, is it engineered? Is it part of our problem that we are chaotic and we are hostile to each other?
I think conflict is a human condition, and conflict comes from, of course, dissatisfaction with different conditions. Among them, in the African context, the ethnic divide, among them resources, among them divergence of views, and so on and so forth. I think the only thing is that I think we are lagging behind when it comes to the rest of the world in terms of still having to shed blood in order to make a point. For the simple reason that I don't think the mechanisms for people to vent their frustrations are adequate. There are many people who feel that there is no place to be except in a violent confrontation with your neighbor, because they don't listen on a good day, they ignore you on a better day, and they'll inflict harm on a worse day. So these sorts of situations are the ones that cause violent outbursts that have made themselves a permanent fixture in recent years on the African continent. But to say that it's unique to this part of the world is not accurate. People are at war and have been at war for many years in the Arab world. More recently, Europe thought that they had actually outlived this situation.
Yes.
But it has visited itself upon them. And of course, in the midterm, between the end of the World War, the Second World War, Europe believed that they had outgrown violent confrontations. But then, of course, there was that Serbia conflict way back. But still, what I'm trying to say is that conflict is not an African thing. It is a human thing.
Absolutely.
Whenever there is no adequate place for these people to actually reach a resolution of their condition, that is the end result. Fortunately for us in Africa, lately, strides have been made in actually mitigating the full-scale charge towards bloodshed. And this has actually been accelerated by this formula that says African solutions for African problems. By the fact that our colonial masters had overtaken us in political terms and in military terms and imposed their order on our societies, they were traditional mediation mechanisms. Among them, we know about the Gacaca courts, and we know about Matoput, but I'm sure there are others.
Of course, all over.
These mechanisms mean that conflict is as old as human beings, or as old as time.
And there were ways of
causing a meeting of the minds. Sometimes, like Ndugu Rugarama indicated, some of that calm was established after a victor had inserted himself in the equation, and whoever was in conflict with them came to a conclusion that there is no other place except to remain calm. In fact, that is the principle that governs peace among the big powers. To know that if I start this war with my neighbor, I will be destroyed. So you keep the peace not because you like them, but because the consequence is worse.
Yeah, so in other words, it is also possible that, like we were saying earlier, that this conflict may not necessarily be that someone doesn't wish us good, but it could also be as a result of our own mistakes and our own greed. Look, of course, people are saying Africa is known for confrontation and conflicts because of the many tribes, clans, whatever. But of course, wherever humans have existed as families, tribes, or clans. Now, the other thing is that, of course, I think they can justify that when you talk of, for example, Nigeria. Nigeria has basically the three major groups: the Hausa in the Fulani in the north, the Igbo in the south, Yoruba. And the Yoruba in the west. But the conflicts have not even stopped in that big country. But when you look at it and you compare it again with a country like Mali, that most of the conflicts are basically in the north. And when you look at the northern Nigeria and you look at the northern Mali towards Algeria, you realize that this is the biggest population of the Fulanis along that corridor. But still, it does not mean that, of course, the religious factor also that like in Mali and Nigeria, basically is the Islamic factor, that people have been Islamized, but not only Islam as a problem, but the fundamentalism which have come in that state. So do you believe that other than the tribe, maybe it is also, and when you look at all these two, that those areas had low education, the north of Nigeria, the north of Mali, the north of the education was not much, and it was actually the religious education which was preferred as compared to formal education. Do you think that this could have also been a problem in other parts of Africa, only talking about those two, education also and religion?
The reasons for conflict are without end. If it's not religion, it will be resources. If it's not resources, it will be your color. If it's not your color, it will be your language. So people are always finding reasons why they should be at conflict with their neighbors. Like I said, it's a human condition. And, but more than that, I think because the reasons have no limit, we should work harder to create spaces in which there can be amicable solutions.
Then which means the exposure to the type of education that we are exposed to could also be key in doing that.
Yes, maybe the style of education, because as you say, you're talking about the present Western education. But people have been in conflict since the beginning of time, even before the white man made it to Africa. Mm-hmm. So conflict is not a new thing. The only thing is that the old ways to mitigate it have fallen by the wayside because of colonial overtones. You were talking about the fact that the white man has continued to inject himself in totally African situations,
yes,
because he's determined to propagate his cause, even in the middle of that. One of the more prominent cases was the situation in Ivory Coast. You know, when Alassane Ouattara was at the neck of Laurent Gbagbo, and they had divided basically the country in two. One of the people who insisted on being at the fore of this mediation was not AU, it was not ECOMOG, it was France. So you wonder, you left this country a long time ago, but why are you injecting yourself?
Talking about France, you remember the other week, was last week, when we were told that the president of Cameroon was given a few slashes in Paris when he was having a birthday party.
They didn't reach him, they reached the minister.
Who suffered?
Yes.
So
the president was far away from them.
So those kinds of laughable situations are really, okay, they impose themselves on us, but we have an obligation to shake off the shackles. And even more recently, or nearer home, there was this situation, which is a number of years ago, when Rwanda had its issues with Habyarimana and so on. You remember, in that situation, the very first mediators that Habyarimana wanted were white men. He said he needs France. The very same man said, okay, now, he named a number of other people. So it is only when it came to a point that, for example, RPF was not very open to those sorts of imported solutions. But we're saying that we're also part of the problem. You have neighbors, and of course along the way we've seen very capable mediators who have put some of these issues to rest. Why are you always looking for imported solutions?
The Kisanos,
yes.
Mandela
but
did
until
a great
now,
job in Burundi.
yes,
the white man had spent a lot of money and a lot of energy showing us that we are incapable of solving our own matters.
but of
That
course,
is the education we are talking
exactly.
about. We
But
have got to de-learn in order to learn how to keep up with resolving our own internal differences, because the differences, like Sister Rachel has already put it, and it is generally shared here, will always be there. They are part of human life. How do we go about it? Homegrown, because I can assure you, 101%, that the rate and the degree at which African societies reconcile and do away with their differences and conflicts is much higher and better than the rest of the world. It is just because we have been interfered with that we have got a situation whereby our problems are getting so-called solutions that are not homegrown, and that is why majority of them never end. We have stepped in DRC. You wait, what is going to happen? That DRC is going to be stabilized.
As long as we know and we have learned from our mistakes what needs to be done, because then the problem has not been that the interference is there, but the problem has also been the
we have failed to occupy our space.
Exactly,
yes.
and nature doesn't allow that vacuum, and basically that's why we have had these problems. But can African Union, can the African leadership come down to realize this mistake, and then the next regime of leaders, the next part of leaders in this continent, realize that we are being misled somehow, or we have led ourselves in the trap that we need to delink, to delearn, so that we are able to move on. And
but we are doing it already. You look, all these groupings we are talking about, look at IGAD, for instance. Look at ECOWAS, for instance. The rate at which they are resolving their internal contradictions, be it economic, be it political, is very smooth and higher. We have had in ECOWAS where regimes wanted to be stubborn, and the statement has come from the ECOWAS community.
Yes, and that please, order.
We have had situations in EACA itself, here, home here, and the statements have come from the leadership and things have happened. It is the Secretary General of EACA recently who was signing papers agreeing that the states on the African continent should deploy, and they accordingly deployed in the DRC.
Viewer, we are going now to Nakawa for the graduation at the Technology Institute, and after we finish that, if we still have time, we'll be back or with you. Now, but if that doesn't happen, we'll be meeting up again next week on Friday continue with the discussions that we're having, the conflicts on the continent. How can we resolve these conflicts on the continent? How can we create sanity amongst ourselves, even with amidst the interference from the rest of the world? We still can do better than we are doing now. So we now take you to Nakawa to join in the graduation at the Technology Institute. Be there.